He thought he was trading a boring starter wife for a life of high-status glamour, bragging to the world that he had finally found a woman who matched his hustle. He didn't realize that by discarding the woman who stayed by his side when he was nothing, he was actually throwing away the keys to a billion-dollar kingdom. But this isn't just a story of a man's epic failure, it's a story of a woman who found her voice, her power, and a love that actually deserved her. Derek Bolton believed he had finally mastered the game. Sitting in his glass-walled corner office in Manhattan, he swirled a glass of vintage scotch and checked his Instagram. The post was perfect, a close-up of his new fiancée's 4-carat diamond ring with the caption, "Finally, a woman who matches my ambition." #power couple #upgrade. To Derek, his ex-wife Lydia was a relic of his broke years, a quiet librarian who preferred old books and animal shelters to the networking galas he craved. He viewed their 6-year marriage as a stepping stone he had outgrown. Jessica, his new flame, was everything Lydia wasn't. She was a 24-year-old influencer who lived for the camera and the likes. Derek mistook her obsession with status for drive, convinced that they were going to conquer the city together. He bragged to his friends that Lydia was pathetic for moving into a small studio in Brooklyn without fighting for alimony. He saw her silence as weakness, a sign that she had no hustle. He was so blinded by his own reflection that he missed the global headlines about the Sinclair Media Group finally naming a successor to their multi-billion-dollar estate. What Derek didn't know was that Lydia's quiet weekends weren't spent in mediocrity, they were spent managing the private archives of her family's foundation. Her full name was Lydia Hart Sinclair. She had lived on a librarian's salary by choice, waiting for the maturity of a trust that would grant her control over the very financial network Derek relied on for his career. She had played the part of the simple wife to see if Derek loved the woman or the potential wealth. He had failed the test spectacularly. As Derek planned a wedding he couldn't actually afford, banking on a future built of smoke and mirrors, Lydia was preparing for a public debut that would turn his entire world into a graveyard of his own making. 3 days before his lavish wedding at a Long Island castle, Derek felt like a king. He had bullied a vendor into giving him passes to the Global Media Summit, the most exclusive networking event of the year. He wanted to rub shoulders with the elite, hoping to secure funding for his own firm. Walking into the ballroom with Jessica, he was desperate to be noticed. But as he scanned the room, his heart dropped. There, in a midnight blue velvet gown that breathed silent luxury, stood Lydia. She wasn't the shabby woman Jessica had mocked. She was radiant, surrounded by the city's most powerful brokers. Driven by a mix of anger and insecurity, Derek marched over to humiliate her, accusing her of crashing a party she couldn't afford. "Go home, Lydia," he sneered, "before security throws you out. This is a place for billionaires, not librarians." Lydia simply looked at him with a calm, unreadable smile. "You're right, Derek," she whispered. "You should focus on your important people. You're going to need them." Minutes after Derek and Jessica left the party early to find a more vibrant scene, the room went dark. A spotlight hit the stage, and the announcer welcomed the new majority shareholder of the Sinclair Group, Lydia Hart Sinclair. The room erupted as she took the stage, her first move being a promise to clean house of toxic, ego-driven leadership in the financial division. Derek's boss, Marcus Sterling, stood in the front row, breaking into a cold sweat as he realized his top VP had just insulted the woman who now owned their bank. Derek went home that night feeling like he'd won an argument, completely unaware that the woman he just called a loser had already authorized a hostile takeover of his entire life. Derek's wedding day was a humid nightmare. He was walking a financial tightrope, having maxed out every credit card to pay for the wedding of the century. During the reception, as he stood to give a toast about winning, the venue manager approached the head table. The final payment had been declined. Panic flared in Derek's chest as he slurred a demand to keep the drinks flowing. But the manager wasn't listening. Suddenly, the projection screens, meant for a slideshow of Derek and Jessica, switched to a live CNBC feed. The ballroom went silent as the headline scrolled across the bottom: Sinclair Media acquires Stratton Oakmont Banking. New chairwoman promises immediate restructuring. Derek's phone buzzed with an email from HR, employment terminated, effective immediately. His best friend Kyle shouted from the groomsmen table, "Dude, your ex-wife just bought your job." The final blow came when the manager handed Derek a note. It wasn't a bailout. Lydia had recently acquired the hospitality group managing the castle. She had instructed them to enforce the contract strictly. Because the payment failed, the wedding was over. Security began escorting the guests out into a torrential downpour. Derek stood on the empty dance floor, holding a maxed-out card and a note from Lydia that read, "You wanted a story people would remember. Now you have one." As Jessica screamed on the curb, eventually leaving Derek in the mud to hitch a ride with Kyle, Derek realized that he hadn't just lost his job and his wife, he had lost his identity. But the true descent was only beginning. A year later, the sharp, arrogant face of a senior VP had dissolved into something tired and defeated. Derek was washing dishes at a 24-hour diner off Route 3. The fragrance of burnt bacon and floor cleaner was his new reality. He had lost the apartment, the Porsche, and every friend who had once liked his posts. He spent his breaks staring at the diner's small TV, watching the woman he had discarded become a global icon of integrity and vision. He watched an interview where Lydia sat on a stone terrace, the ocean glittering behind her. She looked settled, her quietness now a visible strength. She spoke about her new fiancé, an architect who built things instead of destroying them. "I spent a long time hiding who I was," she told the interviewer. "I thought love meant making yourself smaller so the other person could feel big. But I had to clear the dead weight to realize I had everything I needed all along." Derek gripped his mop handle, a physical pain in his chest. He wanted her to be angry, anger meant he still mattered. But she didn't even mention his name. To her, he wasn't a villain, he was just dead weight that had been cleared away. He was a hollow cavern where ambition used to be, realizing too late that he had thrown away a winning lottery ticket because he didn't like the color of the paper. As he watched a young, arrogant man in a suit hop out of a red convertible outside the diner, Derek wanted to scream a warning. But he knew the boy wouldn't listen. Narcissists only hear the silence once it becomes deafening. Derek turned back to the greasy water in his mop bucket, but for the first time, the rage was gone. He looked at a young family sitting at table 4. The father was stressed, checking his phone, ignoring his kids. Derek walked over and refilled the man's coffee with a steady hand. He wasn't a shark anymore, he was just a man. And in that simple act of service, he felt a tiny spark of something he hadn't felt in years: peace. The story of Lydia Hart Sinclair is not just about karma, it is about the healing that comes when you stop seeking validation from people who don't see your soul. Lydia found that her quiet nature wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a sanctuary to be protected. She stopped trying to fit into Derek's shallow world and built a world of her own, rooted in solid iron rather than gold paint. Real power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need Instagram filters or 4-carat rings to prove its worth. If you feel stuck or unseen today, remember that your value is not determined by those who are too blind to see it. Growth often requires clearing the dead weight from your life, the toxic voices, the superficial goals, and the people who want you to be small. When you stop chasing the shine and start looking for the solid foundation within yourself, you don't just survive, you thrive. Healing begins when you realize that losing the wrong people is actually the greatest win of your life. Trust your journey, protect your peace, and remember that the keys to your kingdom were inside you all along.